Tonight, I'm coming to you from the Pershing in Austin. I've done all my live streams from my house, but I decided to go somewhere where they have good Wi-Fi. And so tonight, a special guest, Rodney Crowell. He's a great singer, songwriter, artist, producer, author. He's written some of my favorite songs. I grew up on these songs. Things like "Till I Gain Control Again" and "Song for the Life" and "Stars on the Water" and "Voila," "An American Dream" and "Ashes by Now," "Leaving Louisiana." I mean, "Leaving Louisiana" in broad daylight. If I just wrote that song, I'd be out. I'd quit. Anyway, he's in the Nashville Songwriters Hall of Fame. He's put out something like 21 albums. In the late 1980s, he had a run of I think it was 5 #1 singles in a row. And I have to admit, we were on the same record label at the time, and I found that highly irritating. Anyway, but starting with Houston Kid in 2001, it seemed that his writing shifted, and he kind of tapped into a new body of work and body of songs and stories, and began to mine his own history growing up in Houston in the 50s and 60s. In 2011, he put out a book called Chinaberry Sidewalks. It's a story of growing up in Houston and the shadow of the ship channel and a family given to tough love and alcohol-fueled arguments that often led to violence, and where Hank Williams, Johnny Cash, and Pentecostal preachers reigned supreme, where country music and the blues and early rock and roll showed a different kind of salvation. And eventually that was his ticket out. You know, years ago, I did a radio documentary for the BBC that looked at the effect of the Texas landscape on its songwriters. And I interviewed Rodney, and he told me then that the key ingredient of his landscape was humidity. And I was like, what? And he said, yeah. He said, the music of Jimmy Reed coming through an AM radio on a hot Texas summer night. He goes, I've been trying to get back to that sound my entire life. He's a person who keeps moving, keeps creating, keeps pushing for something better and deeper. He told me once that the trick to staying creative is to stay hungry. He said, I've done well, but I've always had to work. And the friends of mine who don't have to work anymore, their songs start to suck. I mean, that pretty much nails it right there. That's good advice. It's not only good advice for songwriters, it's good advice for everyone. So on that note, I'd like to bring in my friend and our guest, Rodney Crowell. Hello, Mr. Crowell.
Hello, Darden. I was watching you as you gave that introduction to me, and at first, I sat down here and I was really relaxed and stuff. But then as you went on, my heart started to race a little bit.
That's great. Yeah. But I just want to get going here. My first question really is so where do you keep all your gold records and your Grammys? I mean, do you have a storage problem? Is that an issue for you? I've never had that problem myself.
I understand. And I keep them in the garage. I mean, I put the gold records up on the garage wall.
That's good.
And, when I drive in, I look at them sometime. But more interestingly, somebody come around the house and come through the garage and say, you put your gold records up on the garage. It seems like the right place. There's humility there, and at the same time, it's like, well, I can't really take myself that seriously because the one thing I need to do is clean this freaking garage out.
Yeah, exactly.
The leaves blowing it. It's like, man, I'm 6 years behind on this.
Yep, it also makes you think your gold records are that far from being thrown out.
Yeah, there must be an expiration date on it.
Yeah. So I got a question. When let's say you're on a plane, and back when we used to take flights, and you sit down next to somebody, and they go, and they don't know who you are, and they say, well, what do you do? What's your job? What do you tell them?
Tell them I'm a songwriter.
Mm-hmm. And kind of, do you talk about?
And then with that, it's like, oh yeah. Anything I would have heard.
Yeah.
And I say, yes. And they said, well, what would it be? And I said, I'm not going to tell you. It seems like, it seems, I've been pretty successful in songwriting, but it seems something in my nature is like, I'm not going to sit there on a plane with a stranger and rattle off 6 songs or 12 songs that they don't know.
Yeah.
Or maybe they know, but I just, but then they say, well, anybody ever record your songs? And then I'll go, well, yeah, Johnny Cash and Bob Seger, the Grateful Dead.
Yeah, top that.
That works,
That works. Yeah.
Yeah. Fame, it's like, I'm not famous, but I've been around it.
Yeah. Well, I think when somebody says if you're famous, like if you have to ask if someone's famous, they're not really that famous. Well,
Darden, I know you got another question, but I always find this interesting. Like, somebody kind of, I look like an artist, and people say, hey, I think, are you somebody? I say, well, I'm so, yeah, and then finally I cave in. I said, well, my name's Rodney Crowell. And they said, oh, well, I'm sorry, I didn't know who you were. And I said, I would always say, well, I'm not sorry, I didn't know who you were.
That's right. Yeah, my line for that is there's millions of people that don't know who I am. Don't feel bad.
Don't feel bad. I don't know who you are.
Yeah. So why do you do this? I mean, because I don't know any person who grew up and where their family and the people around have said, you know what I think you should do with your life? I think you should be a songwriter. Like no one says that. So why do you do what you do?
It's the only thing I can do. It's like people say, well, if you had another job, what would it be? And I go, all self, puffed up and say, well, I'd be a cultural anthropologist, and I'd probably be a good one with an education.
Yeah, I think you are a cultural anthropologist.
Yeah, probably so in some ways. I think I probably live that way. But look, my mother and my father, given the genetic coding in those two people, and you went on about my book, so I assumed that you really sounded like you knew what you were talking about. Well, those two people, given where their bloodlines and where they come from, I could have. There's nothing else I could have been but a songwriter. My father was a savant. About he grew up on a sharecrop farm in western Kentucky, with only a dry cell radio about 6 miles away that he had to walk to. Yet he somehow, and he could hear a Roy Acuff song one time and have it. He had that ability. So he had a wealth of songs that he knew, and I grew up hearing those songs that he knew. Now, my mother, on the other hand, had she been educated, she had a 7th grade education. Had she been educated, she would have been a lecturer of some sort, and language would have been, were she educated, she would have drifted toward language, because she played with the language when I was growing up. She made rhymes and limericks and would say little silly things and play with words, juggle words. And
do you think that's a country, like a rural thing? Is it a southern? Is it the Irish Scotch thing? Is that where the word?
It is Scots Irish, and it is the church. It's the Pentecostal church.
Pentecostal church, right?
Yeah, my mother was top drawer Pentecostal. She spoke in tongues, with great. Sorry.
At the house?
No, at church.
Right.
She was like the volunteer. Whenever one of the preachers would get the house going really good, my mother would. They sort of had a cue that she would fall on the floor and start spewing stuff. And words would, these unknown tongues would be flying out of her, and the preacher would be kneeling over with his hand in the air, interpreting what she was saying
just so for people that don't understand, I've seen that a couple of times. When that is happening, is there music going on at the same time? Is there like tambourines and music playing and people clapping?
Currently there is. Most modern churches have a band.
Well, what about when you grew up?
I mean, God, you could see it, with Al Sharpton a couple of days ago preaching, George Floyd's eulogy. The organ player, man, he was accenting every point that Al Sharpton was making with, exquisitely. Now, in the case of, in the 50s in East Houston, the budget didn't allow for that. So my mother could spit it out,
So do you think that's where you got your rhythm of language from?
I think I got a lot of rhythm. I got it from both of them. But, just to go back to my point, I've thought about this a long time. I was born to be a songwriter. And coming through the genetic coding of those two into this world, that was what I was supposed to be. I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, and I love it. And at a pretty young age, I started to cultivate an appreciation for the art form, in that I started to study the art form. And
what age? What age?
Oh, early 20s, 22. When I first got to Nashville, and I started writing songs in college with my buddy Donovan Cowart, but they weren't any good. But when I got to Nashville in 1972, it wasn't long until I was in constant contact with Guy Clark and some other songwriters like that.
Pretty good.
And I was smart enough to know that my songs were really sophomoric compared to theirs. So I paid real close attention, and I started to study. I started to read. I snapped at around age 22 that said, "Oh, if I'm going to be a writer, I really need to read. I need to understand language."
Had you not read much before that?
No. I grew up in subtropical climate in Houston.
World country.
I ran barefoot from November until, I would say barefoot from March until November.
Right.
And it was outdoors, as I get out there, it was like, so I wasn't reading, I wasn't bookish. But once I realized that, that my game was writing songs, I started to read constantly, everything I could get a hold of.
So speaking of Houston, like that time that you grew up, like, how does that Houston and that time in Texas itself and the mythology of Texas, how does that sort of figure into what does it mean to you, and what do you carry with you from that, and how does that work into your writing, your sound, your music and your sound, and sort of how you deal with your life? Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Well, growing up at the east side of Houston along the Ship Channel, it was working class. Wage slaves, working class. My father started out as a laborer and eventually was a smart guy. Eventually ran a construction company along the Ship Channel there. But on the east side of Houston, much like Detroit, uneducated kids who wanted to find work other than sharecrop labor would go to Houston, the same way that the auto industry provided work for people who migrated into Detroit.
Sure.
Ahead, when the oil industry started to really come to life, there was menial labor, and eventually there was union jobs, union pipe fitters and what have you. So along the east side of Houston, it was a honky-tonk culture. It was a jukebox culture. And
what do you mean jukebox culture?
Jukebox, jukeboxes,
I know what jukeboxes are, but when you say jukebox,
well, for instance, eating out for my family was go down to Christian's Drive-In, which was fried chicken livers and gizzards and hamburgers, and
you are today, really,
and with an oyster shell drive parking lot, and with a cool jukebox with New Orleans rhythm and blues and country music. Really none of that soft pop stuff like How Much Was My Doggy in the Window. It was Jimmy Reed and it was Hank Williams, and so the music, and there was a culture that consumed that music, danced to that music, played dominoes to that music, drank whiskey to that music, and I was around, the social circle around my father and mother was very much centered on consuming and using country music. And in the case of my aunt, she had exquisite taste in New Orleans rhythm and blues. So I was
side or your father's side?
On actually my mother's brother's wife.
So this would be the music coming out of New Orleans, Alan Toussaint and all that.
Yeah, or like the first time, Alan Toussaint, or the first time I heard Frogman Henry Ain't Got No Home was on a little 45 stack. My Aunt Mary loved Elvis Presley. She was from Star City, Arkansas, and I mean, she dreamed Elvis Presley.
Right.
And so she had all the Elvis 45s, but she also had the Fats Domino 45s. She had the Alan Toussaint stuff, and she had Frogman Henry. And, on my first album, I covered Elvira, Dallas Frazier song. Yeah. And the first time I heard that song was on a little 45 RPM record player at my Aunt Mary Ruth's house.
So it was really country, rhythm and blues,
mm-hmm.
and that was the vibe. I hear that in your music now. I've been in Rodney Crowell land for about 5 days. Yesterday I listened to 7 Rodney Crowell albums. They're pretty good. Check them out. And anyway, there's a rhythmic thing that you have in your writing, which is like Earthbound, which is a later song, which I've always loved Earthbound. And it even goes back to early. You have this way that you deal with rhythm in words. It's like, where do you think that comes from? Because it's not normal. It's not normal. In country music, it's not normal.
I started playing drums.
I know, yeah.
Yeah, and I didn't stay there long. I was 11, and my dad brought home a pawn shop set of drums, showed me how to play. That was on a Tuesday, and on Friday night I was playing at a honky tonk on Red Bluff Road with him. So although I would have probably been a really good drummer had I stayed with it. I think my sensibilities as what would have happened, I'd have been somewhere in the league with the really good ones like Levon or Ringo or something. I really believe that.
Drums play a big part in your records.
Well, they do.
Big part of your sound.
They do. They do. And I like working with them. But to get back, something about the way I write, I noticed a long time ago, and Guy Clark and I wrote some songs together, and sometimes I'd add a word or I'd add 3 words to a line that he would have. I'd say, like, and he'd say, "Okay, you're drumming on me here." and sometimes I find the phrases find 2 extra words that make a syncopated thing happen. And sometimes I consciously say, okay, that's me getting into that pattern, and I need to get out of that. I need to consciously find another way of phrasing so that I learn something new about myself.
Right.
But I've come to accept that it's a percussion pattern that language, and there again, it's like if I go back to my mother speaking in tongues, writhing on the floor, man, she was, it was hip hop, the way it came out of her mouth. It was rap, and that stuff was happening. In when I was 5 years old, 6 years old, I was absorbing.
That goes in deep.
Yeah.
So you grew up in this, the family. It was, I read your book, and the book talks about you were loved. There was also it was challenging, and a lot of alcohol and tough surroundings. I'm curious about. Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
Into how does that figure? How did that coming from that, and then you get going in the music business? Sort of, how did that drive you?
How did
it drive? Like
the dysfunction that I grew up in?
Yeah, and also coming from a place of hardship. When you get into the music business,
yeah. Well, I think, I inherited some self-destructive tendencies, and I had to later learn. I had to deconstruct my self-destructive tendencies. But early on, when I got in the music business, when I got into Nashville, I was hanging with some people that were really self-destructive. So
professionally self-destructive.
Yeah, and some that didn't live long, some that didn't make it very far. But it gave me, because I actually drew on that sort of subconsciously. There was some, I had a lot of that. What have I got to lose? When I first
in you.
Yeah, and what have I got to lose? Where I come from, I ain't got nothing to lose. It's like I'm white trash. But I outgrew it pretty quickly.
Do you feel like you had more of a drive to succeed?
I'm sorry?
Do you feel like you had a really strong drive to succeed? Like, I'm going to, by God, make it because I don't want to go back there?
No. I became a father at age 25. My first daughter was born, and at age 26 and a half, I was a single father living in LA.
Wow.
I had a 16-month-old daughter, and her mother and I split, and I got custody of the child. So I had to.
At 25.
Well, the child was born at 25, but
that's heavy, man.
26 and a half, in there heading toward 27, it was like, okay, I've got a kid. So that really, and my mother and father drove out to LA from Houston, and without calling me or asking, to get the child, to get my daughter. And I said, you've driven a long way for nothing. You should have called me. I'm gonna raise this kid. This is my kid. So that was a turning point for me.
In what way?
In that I needed that's when I needed to grow up, and I needed to learn how to read the fine print, and I needed to pay attention. It took me a while.
Well, sure.
But that became all pervasive in my life. It eventually, all of the substance, it had to fall away because I couldn't live up to my responsibilities, and I gave it a good go, and ultimately, being a father is my crowning achievement so far.
Wow.
Yeah, it is. It's like I've done that, and trust me, I've made glaring, ugly mistakes. But
in parenting.
Yes. But it's still what I do best.
That's great.
It is.
Beautiful, man.
Thanks.
Chip Taylor, songwriter Chip Taylor, told me one time, he said, nobody knows what they're doing. And he goes, believe me, I've made every mistake I can possibly make parenting, and my kids still love me, and I love them. He goes, so just do what you can, love them, and you'll be fine.
Love is like.
So when you moved to Nashville in '72, did you already see yourself as a songwriter, or were you like, I'm going to go learn how to be a songwriter? Or like, what was you moved there with Donovan Coward, right?
It's a long story.
We have a few minutes. Yeah.
I'll try to make it short.
Okay.
There was an old engineer at Gold Star Studios in Houston who.
What studio?
Gold Star.
Where was that at?
That was out there on
Was it on Jensen?
no, it was on Southwest Freeway, in the Southwest Freeway area.
Right.
And 13th floor. This guy recorded 13th floor elevators out there. Billy Gibbons and ZZ Top recorded out there. All kind of stuff. B.B. King recorded out there. Well, we got discovered over in Pasadena, Texas, on the east side by this engineer. So he took us to Crowley, Louisiana.
You remember what his name was?
Yes, I do, but I'm not gonna say it because there I have disparaging words.
Oh, okay, great. Okay,
his
fine.
name shall remain.
Let's keep this up. Let's keep this on a positive note.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we go to Crowley, Louisiana, and we make a record over there. My friend Donovan and I. We were like a Texas Simon and Garfunkel.
Mm-hmm.
And we wrote some really bad songs. And it was a studio over there that J.D. Crowley owned. They made a lot of those race records, those Louisiana race records, those nasty records, If you go down to San Antonio, they made them there. And it was above a beauty shop. And there was a steel guitar player there named Pee Wee Whitewing. And
great name.
Yeah, he played with Hank Thompson.
Right. And
he was living in Crowley, Louisiana. And so he came in to overdub on these tracks we were recording. And he pulled me aside, and he was a sweet guy. He said, "Hey, Rodney, you seem like an okay guy." He said, "You think you're making a record here, but you're not." I got my hackles up, I said, "What do you mean?" I mean, yeah, we got Pee Wee Whitewing
exactly.
on it. It's like, what do you mean we're not making a record? He said, "You'll figure it out. You're not making a record."
Wow.
And so I was like,
what was the secret message he was telling you?
That, well, I'll tell you. So we go back to Houston, Donovan and I, and the producer goes off to Nashville with the tapes. So he calls from Nashville and he says, "Get up here right now. You got to get up here." Well, why? He says, "I'm signing you to a 10-year deal with Columbia Records, and you're going on tour for a year with Kenny Rogers and the First Edition."
Holy cow.
Man, Don, between the two of us, we had $40 maybe.
Yeah.
So, man, we hopped in my car and we headed for Nashville. We stopped in Nacogdoches where we flunked out of college and had a big party and picked up a dad-gad guitar player there, a guy who was really into Irish music. And we headed off to Nashville. And when we arrived, sadly we got here about 3 o'clock in the morning, expecting, a marching band to meet us, And so the next day we went to Columbia Records, the next day. Said, "Well, we're here."
Parade.
Who are you? So none of this was true.
Really?
The producer had actually, later on, this songwriter we knew down in Houston drove all the way to Nashville, found us. I don't remember how he found us, and said, "Hey, man, none of that was true." He said, and the producers sold your tapes to Surefire Music for $100 for a bus ticket home.
Wow.
And so here's the button. That's how I got to Nashville.
And so then you're
under
stuck.
false pretense.
So
let me just tell you the last thing, Darden. You'll like this. So Donovan and I went around at lunchtime, and the guy told us where the tapes were, sitting on top of a filing cabinet. I don't know how he knew. And so we went around at lunchtime, and Donovan was a real charming character, and the receptionist there, he kept her entertained while I slipped in and stole our tapes and all our publishing papers. They're right back in my studio right now, those tapes.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So so there I was.
That's the easiest anyone ever got their masters back. That's the easiest time
man. Got them back. I've never put them on a reel-to-reel tape machine to see what
lifted you up when you came to Nashville and you got there. Who were if you're like life was, if your time in Nashville and your arrival there was a pinball machine, who were the bank shots that lifted you up, that got you on the right road, that you look back now and go, if I hadn't had that introduction, that meeting,
right?
conversation,
Yeah. That's real simple. I was playing my guitar in Centennial Park, and during the day, and trying to be close enough to a pretty hippie girl for her to hear my sad, navel gazing song, and it wasn't working. So there was a circus performer who was out of work. He came around, he listened to a couple of songs. He says, there's this guy around here named Guy Clark. You need to find him. He'll help you out with this.
Wow.
And so it wasn't very long. And as it would happen, I started hanging around at Bishop's Pub, and I met Skinny Dennis Sanchez and Richard Dobson, a couple of yahoos, and by then I'd gotten a job washing dishes, and they were loafers, and they said, "You got a job, don't you? We got an extra bed over on Ackland Avenue. Why don't you come move in with us?" Okay, so I was working. I was washing dishes.
Yeah.
And, a week or so after that, I came in one day and a guy was passed out on my bed. And, just rough out boots on, just face down on my bed. And Susanna, his wife, she said, "I've heard about you." We started talking. She said, "We're going to be really good friends." And I'm saying, "What's he doing?" She said, "He'll be all right." And then, then we became fast friends, and Guy, in his way, in his kind of no nonsense, he just said, "Okay, look, man," he said, "pay attention. Just pay attention." And so I did, and I started to learn things. That began in education, and luckily I would tag along with Guy to different places, to Tom Paul Glazer's studio for an all-night hangout. Eventually somebody would turn to me and say, "Well, what about you?" And I would play some song I'd learned from my dad years ago, and that was enough. And it was Guy. It was Guy.
Other than like saying pay attention, what do you think he was doing for you? When you look back, maybe other than like introducing you to people, was he like, I assume the guy was older than you? Was he older?
9 years older.
What did he really do for you that other people didn't do? Other than introducing you and things like that.
People have asked me about Guy, and Guy was, as songwriting goes, of everybody that I've been in close contact with, Guy was the best self-editor I've ever come across. I called him Maxwell Perkins a lot of time. Who, Maxwell Perkins edited Hemingway and take your pick, Thomas Wolfe, I guess. And Guy was a superb self-editor. He was able to, and as 22-year-old kid coming into town and writing these songs, and there was no skill attached to it. I just thought if it came to me and I could sing it, I had a sense of melody, but I had no sophistication in the language, and no real understanding of revision, self-editing, in order to distill the song down to something more than just the first regurgitation that you have. And that became something that it was a slow dawning, but it started to build, and I started to understand. And then an upside of that on the competitive front was that I was, as Guy's little friend, able to be in these songwriting sessions with Harlan Howard and Townes Van Zandt, and every once in a while they would turn to me and I would play, something, "May I Sleep in Your Barn Tonight, Mister," some old country folk song that, some Roy Acuff thing that was cool. Oh, that stuff, Yeah. But what I wanted to do was pull out one of my own songs that belonged in the circle. And when I wrote Song for the Life, it was the beginning. And then I wrote Till I Gain Control again there, at around 22, 23.
Wow.
And then I could play those songs in that setting. And it's like, okay, I can actually put something forward that I've written that, they're not going to laugh at.
So they showed you where the upper rung was.
That's true.
And they said you can hang around until you get here.
Yeah. And you know what?
That's so rare now. It's so rare.
One of the things about that high bar, that it's okay if you come in under it. It's okay if you come in under it, as long as you understand that what you're really shooting for is to go over it.
That's golden, man.
So to this day,
we could all hear that as young songwriters. A, there's a high bar, and B, it's okay if you don't hit it.
Yeah, well, to this day, it's like Bob Dylan, Leonard Cohen. That's a high bar, and when I work, I don't try to do what they do, but that's the bar. And if I don't go over the bar, and I don't have the objectivity nor the arrogance to think I've ever gone over that bar.
You've come very close, my friend.
But I've come in under it pretty close a few times, and that's why I can, to this very day, to this very morning, when I was working on the song that I'm working on right now, it's like that's the bar, And there are some others that set that bar too.
Beautiful. So I want to shift gears a little bit because one of the things I've always admired about you is that you've had multiple sort of waves in your career. You've gone up. You had your early time, then you had the time in the 80s with Diamonds and Dirt. We had those number ones, and you've had your book. The thing that I noticed when I had my deal, and record deal and all that stuff, you get going. No one ever tells you about what happens when the deal ends and when things fall apart. So talk to me. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So talk to me a little bit about kind of like, what's it like for you? What's it been like for you when things fell apart, and how did you bounce? How did you deal with that? And was there a habit, a pattern, or just how, kind of talk to me about your experience with that? How do you pick yourself up?
Well, yeah, it's a valuable thing to know. For instance, I had that commercial run with Diamonds and Dirt, and
I hated you, man. I was not a fan.
I understood, but I really liked you. You were one of the guys on the label that I liked that guy. Yeah, I did.
Thank you.
It's like you hated me, but I liked you.
Okay, well, so, I like you more now.
I knew that it would balance.
Turn around. Yeah.
We got where we belong.
Yeah.
But my cousin Larry Willoughby was worked A&R.
Larry Willoughby.
Yeah, he was MCA, and one of my closest friend who produced Diamonds and Dirt was the head of A&R at MCA. So MCA Records. So and those were my pals, and Vince Gill was over there, and Vince was my pal, and they were raking in the dough, and they were all happening, and I had been happening, but I was you go up and you come down, and so they signed me to MCA, and I left Columbia, and Columbia would have stuck with me, but I wanted to go over there with my friends who really had it going on with Lyle Lovett was there, and Steve Earle, and it was swinging, and so they gave me a lot of money, and I went over there, and but then it's my nature, they gave me so much money, and so I went in the studio, I wrote some songs, went in the studio and started to record. But I was thinking about making hits. I've never written a hit song, and I've never made a hit record when I was thinking about it. It's just whenever I'm just, innocent and just being instinctive and in the flow of creativity, good things happen. But I made a couple of records at MCA that I was up in my head because they gave me a lot of money, and
Trying too hard.
and well, you know, it's like I'm, you know, East Houston white trash. You know, it's like, well, they gave me all this money, man. I got to deliver. And I made a couple of mediocre records, and you know, then one day my cousin, you know, had a, you know, A&R, and my really close friend who's really, really on fire, you know, they invite me to lunch. Yeah. Tony Brown and Larry, they invite me to lunch.
All right.
And they fire me. They released, you know, they basically, you know, it's like they kicked me off the label. And it was a great experience for me because it just gutted me. And it really, man, my confidence just went into free fall. And I understood, though. I got to say, I understood.
Economic, yeah.
Sorry?
It was an economic cut. They had to cut you, right?
Well, yeah, they gave me so much money, and and there was one particular person at the label who didn't get my trip.
Yeah.
And he was in a power position.
Mm-hmm.
He was the guy who got him on the radio.
He actually had the button.
Yeah, he had a button, and Rodney Crowell wasn't his. So they had to drop me, you know. But the thing of it was, it was crushing, but I slowly healed from it, and that was when I grew. You know, I grew up when I got a daughter. When my first child, I started to grow up. And then when I really started to grow up in this music business thing was when I got dropped from the label and told, we can't use you.
And so what is the best result of that? What's the best?
What came of that was what you described, starting with the Houston Kid.
Mm-hmm.
You know, then I wrote, you know, then I all of the music in the run-up period for 3 or 4 years after that. I stayed home, and I was a single father. I had some kids in high school by then, and junior high. And
did you kind of go into a shell?
Well, no, man, because the woman that I'm with today, we met in '92, and we were building a marriage, and we to our credit, we spent about 6 years building a marriage that is really flourishing in this particular pandemic time. Right. I've been having a wild romantic fling with my wife.
That's awesome.
You know,
and she has a backdrop
after 28 years.
And she has a backdrop that
with her, you know. But it led me, when I came out of it, I said, look, you know, from now on, I'm going to do exactly what I want to do. I'm going to follow my heart. I'm never again going to think about trying to make anything other than what I feel really passionate about making. And one of the things I'm going to do is go toward things that I'm afraid of. And yeah,
writing
and performing and records. You know, I was really afraid of Faith's Right Hand. You know, I was singing. You know, I was really going into my spiritual side of myself, and
that's a real turn, that album. So and was that? I mean, I can hear that in your records. You know, that turn. Mm-hmm. And what did that have any bearing on your comfort of just being you? And was it easier to show up?
Yeah. But I really think that, you know, taking the ego hit that, hey, you're not as cool as you're not as cool as you think you are. You just got dropped from the label because they don't really believe that you can deliver the goods. That was really good for me. It took a while, but what I built inside myself was a sense of myself. And frankly, the work that I've done, starting with the Houston Kid, it was about age 50. And the China Berry Sidewalks and Sex and Gasoline and Close Ties and
Close Ties is amazing.
Yeah, to me, that's what I want to be remembered for.
Yeah. Well,
and it started with, getting the bubble burst. So have I answered you?
Getting what?
The bubble burst, the ego bubble. Ego bubble. I'm cool, as while walking around, people look at me.
You know people who the bubble burst and it doesn't work out for them the way that it worked out for you? It bubble bursts and that it never happens again?
Is that so? Well, yes.
Do you know people that go through the same process that you did and the bubble bursts and they don't keep going? Do you know? I mean, I'm sure you know.
Yeah. I would, but I think I think, the compassion you have to have for that is like, I can't pass judgment on people crumbling on it. But I will say this. I do have great compassion for someone who had a hit or two who gets stuck on, quote unquote, what we call the oldie circuit, going around playing that. The one thing that the audience that has grown with me, they've been really patient with me. I do play songs I wrote in the 70s and 80s and stuff, but mainly I try to continue to survive on what I've most recently written.
Right.
And that's the foot I want to put forward. Now, people paying money, they want to hear Leaving Louisiana Broad Daylight. I'm happy to play it. I'm happy to play them all. But it seems like to me, if I reach the point where I don't feel like I have something somewhat viable in the moment that I'm creating right now, which I'm working on a record right now, then I think I would probably stand down if it became clear to me that I wasn't growing anymore, and that if I'm going to stay in the game, I would have to just rehash what I've already done.
So it's not about money. Not about money. I think you just
it was only about money in the mid-'90s when they gave me too much.
Yeah. So
I got overpaid for a while. It wasn't good.
Now it's about digging and working and keeping going that thing.
And
that hunger thing that you told me in the 80s. I don't know if you remember that conversation we had about hunger that I talked about in the very beginning, about staying hungry. That's the thing I've always loved about you, is that you stay hungry. It's an inspiration.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm still hungry. One of the things about I'm also coming to understand that the aging process, your energy becomes something different, and how the kind of hunger that you have as a 24-year-old and as a 34-year-old, 44-year-old, 64-year-old, or it becomes something different. It becomes more interior. The older you get, the more mining you do from the inside, and it's a singular experience that, as it narrows, and I've read a book recently. My friend Dan Levitin wrote a book called Successful Aging. I suggest it, and he talks about as we get older, as our experience starts, it's like when we're younger, we're blasting outward. We're trying to we're very social. Our expression is going outward, and as we get older, it starts to become, you narrow down. Maybe you get fewer friends. I'll still have my friends are there, but he says in the book, it's part of the experience of getting ready for your own death, is that your internal relationship becomes more singular, right down to the end of your life. And so I'm consciously trying to work with that energy and with that transition. Is like, okay, if that's the case, and I think Leonard Cohen did it so beautifully at the end, his last I was a Leonard Cohen fan, but his last three albums that he made, the live, with Waiting for the Miracle and Old Ideas with, if, what's that beautiful song that he has, Come Healing, or his very last one, You Want It Darker. He's my personal mantra right now, because he, more than anybody who's creating songs or was creating songs, was using that energy and that experience as your gaze narrows down. How do you create big things with that narrowing? And that's what I'm working on right now. And
That's beautiful.
yeah, I'm really trying to see if my creativity is strong enough to turn that narrowing into something bigger.
It's really great. So I guess that kind of leads me to this last question. I kind of set up for this idea. In your book, there's a place. Actually, there's a chapter called Spit, Shine, Charlie, and Grandma Kate. Is that right?
Katie, yeah, Spit, Shine.
So in that, you talk about, and Spit, Shine, Charlie was a shoe shine guy,
right,
at a barbershop, and used to hang out with him. There was a barbershop that I went to in Brenham. I grew up in Brenham, Texas, and then I moved to Houston. But there was a shoe shine guy, so that I really resonated with that. So you talk about there was this stillness that you experienced around Charlie and your Grandma Kate. And it was like a love that you didn't get from anyone else.
True.
And I hear that coming through in your songs, like, Song for the Life, Until I Gain Control Again. And All I Need, I Know Love Is All I Need. I hear that sort of stillness. So I'm thinking, where do you find that still, that deep, focused stillness now? And do you find it now? And where do you find it?
Yes, I do. I find it. I find that I'm living it more. It's like some of the songs that you just mentioned. Sometimes, we write things that we're going to grow into. I'm sure you've done it.
Yes.
You write something and then later on, it's like Song for the Life. I wrote that at age 22, I think, and I grew into it, and actually, it became a hit 28 years later. After,
really?
Yeah,
I didn't realize that. That's
Alan
amazing.
Jackson, and I said, "Isn't that interesting? That song, exactly what it was about is what it became."
Wow.
But to answer your question, I find that piece. And writing songs, like I Know Love Is All I Need, or it's like I was living it in a smaller way. I was living enough of it to know what it was. But as I'm getting older, and this, shelter in place, notwithstanding all the sorrow and pain and people, suffering and losing lives and jobs and money and stuff, it's been a blessing, a huge blessing in my life, because for the first time in 15, 20 years, I've been stationary for 4 months.
Right.
And the one thing that, and I wasn't lying, I've been having a love affair with my wife.
She's sitting over there. She's looking at you right now, right?
Yeah, she doesn't know.
Yeah.
But she knows that I'm digging her. But I find that I'm living in that grace sometimes, and for longer periods, most recently, and it's not, and to write about it, it's almost easier to write about it for what you're projecting, someplace in the future to live into it.
Right.
So, I've been writing, it's just been, I'm having to write about climate change, and I'm having to write about things like that, because that's, I have to, I'm trying to make peace in advance. If we don't wake up, and do something about climate change,
Right.
We're going to be living through something that's more difficult than what we're living through now.
Right.
And I seem to be riding toward whoever I might be when that happens, and trying to make sense of who I might be then. Yeah, you follow me what I'm saying there?
Yeah. And so the stillness that you glimpsed with Spitshine Charlie and your grandma Kate, you're more living in it.
I've almost lived into it.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, hey, I think that pretty much.
This is your podcast, and you've been asking me all the questions I've been answering, and I feel like I could ask you 10 or 12 questions only about how you're doing and what's up with you.
Well,
so, forgive me. Maybe we can turn this around.
Yeah, give me a call, man. Rodney, thank you so much.
You bet.
So I would like to also thank the Purging here in Austin, who's hosting us tonight, and the production team. Jamie Harris has been slogging away for 2 days helping us with this, and here at the Purging quarterback, and Jeremy Parker. And especially thank you to my great friend and just role model, Rodney Crowell. All right. Thank you, brother.
Thank you, Darden. Yeah, man. Be well.
All right.